Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Genesis Community Livecast. This is our Genesis Shapers recap episode for September 2021 Shapers meeting titled New Mobile Style Tools for Genesis Blocks, by the way, and more. For those who don't know me, I'm David Vogelpohl. I've been a member of the Genesis community for over 8 years, and I love helping the Genesis community get better together with my friends from the Shapers. Joining me today for this Shapers recap episode is kind of a special episode and kind of a special person joining us. But I'd like to welcome to the recap episode, of course, someone very well known to the Studio Press community as he was one of the founders or the founder. I'd like to welcome Brian Gardner. Brian, welcome to the livecast.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out. And I know today will be a good, fun show. For those who don't know, I've been using Genesis before Genesis became Genesis. David may have mentioned previously, I am the co-creator of Genesis. Nathan Rice developed most of it. A lot of it was my ideology. And so we can kind of claim the co-creator. But yeah, I've been using Genesis long before Genesis was cool. So
awesome. And I know we've been on podcasts before, and I've introduced you as Brian Gardner but this week we had a change, right? Like September 20th.
Yep.
What was the change? Like, who are you with now?
So I decided to take a full-time job because I was presented an opportunity that I couldn't refuse. It was amazing. It aligns with everything I love about online stuff, design, WordPress, building community. And it just so happens to be the same place you are employed.
Oh, cool. Does that mean I'll see you at the virtual water cooler around the way?
Yes.
Nice.
On September 20th, I officially started my full-time position at WP Engine, and I couldn't be any happier.
Awesome. Well, we're so glad to have you here and back in the work family and with all your other Genesis and Studio Press comrades from the past. I know they were all very excited to hear you joining the team. And so that's super exciting. Really looking forward to what you'll work on from here on out. But let's go ahead and jump into the Shapers recap, though. Again, glad to have you.
Thank you.
First question of the day is the first question we ask every day, or the meeting was the first question we ask every meeting, which is a show of emoji for those who were able to attend. We have Madison Sadler from the WP Engine engineering team, Nawai Bidola from Awesome Press. They have the hand waving emoji. Sally Getch rhymes with sketch. She did just the hand emoji, but not the waving hand. Do you think that means something, Brian?
It almost looks like the talk to the hand, right? Kind of a thing. But I think she just probably grabbed the first one that was there. So Sally's good people. So I won't think anything otherwise.
Yeah, WP Fangirl is how some folks may be familiar with her. She's also on the West Coast, so actually she does get, it's very early for her this meeting.
Yes.
So she can, I could see her getting grumpy. So it could be a talk to the hand thing, not because of her as a person, but just because of the earliness. Bill Erickson, Carrie Dills, Ryan Murray. I don't even know. Ryan's got like a fish sock puppet for his emoji. Were able to attend. It looks like we had Anita Carter and others show up later, but they hadn't replied to that emoji thread there. All right, cool. First real question of the day. I guess the first one was real, but the first topical question of the day was we provided a pre-release version of Genesis Blocks version 1.3.0, which includes new mobile style options. There's a blog post on the Studio Press blog you can go check out with details to that. But asked them if they had gotten a chance to test it and try it before the meeting. It looked like not hardly any, I guess Nawai was able to test it, but people were like reading the post, and basically Nawai's comments were around extending the mobile style controls to the Genesis blocks themselves. Brian, have you had a chance to test the mobile style controls since or before that meeting?
Yeah, I did a little bit. Responsiveness is such an important thing now as it was, or more so than it was, years ago, because so many people are using just mobile devices now, tablets and phones and stuff like that. And so there's always sort of this balance, right, between what do we do as creators and putting into our products versus what does WordPress do? Because on some level, you don't want to like duplicate or reinvent the wheel if it's there. And so like there's sort of like this chicken before the egg thing. It just seems like it's always been that way, sort of with within the community of, well, should we do it first before WordPress does? Because inevitably they may do something. And if so, is it a better method? Is it not a better method? And so on some level, you just have to do what's best for your product, right? Because if the customers are asking for it, you got to do it. And maybe you iterate, right? Maybe WordPress comes out with a different way to do it. And, it's easy to sort of pull back at that point. But responsiveness, typography, spacing, there's a lot of nuances, and menus are going to become probably one of the biggest ones. How do you handle that like on a mobile thing? So I think it's great that the team's already working on that.
Awesome. For those unfamiliar with the feature, it's available in 1.3.0. So you can download the update for it now in Genesis blocks. The controls are available within the block controls themselves. So this is not setting it with CSS and things like that. But it does, of course, make those capabilities much more accessible, I feel, as you're building a page, whether you don't know code or you do know code, how to code, but you just want to move more quickly. So hopefully folks will find those valuable and as well as that feature evolves over time. All right, next question for the shapers is, what plugins are critical for every WordPress site you build, Genesis specific plugins or not? And this is a question we ask, about twice a year just to see how things evolve. So it looks like we have, Carrie says Gutenberg, but I asked plugins, so she must mean the Gutenberg plugin, which is kind of interesting.
Well, I followed that up. I don't know if you saw, I followed that up by asking her if she deploys Gutenberg on client sites, because I'm really always interested, because I know Gutenberg's sort of like the bleeding edge of what's ultimately going to be in core. And so there's a lot of things that come in and out of the plugin, breaking changes at times. And so when I hear people say, I use Gutenberg, that's like, okay, I understand. People are playing with it and testing it, but do you deploy it on a client site? That's even more interesting to me, because what happens with, and it just happened, 11.5 came out with a new way to handle spacing on the navigation menu block. And on my own sandbox site, I see that it's double spacing now. I'm like, what happens if that was like on a client site and you just hit the update button? All of a sudden you would break the way the front end looks. And so curious about that, I think, on some level, for how people handle that agency wide.
There's somebody watching this right now, Brian, who's like, wait a minute, I thought Gutenberg was that thing in WordPress where you build stuff with blocks. And I think this gets to a lot of it's confusing, I think, for folks, because people are using the term Gutenberg to describe the block editor inside WordPress core. And of course, you and I were just talking about it through the lens of Gutenberg, the plugin, and where they're testing out all the new block stuff. And so, I think that part of that confusion also comes in there, but I guess she never clarifies actually if she was using the plugin or she was referencing Gutenberg as, quote, the block editor. But she also mentions Yoast Redirection, which was a bit of a surprise to me to see so many people mention redirection and redirecting plugins. But of course, with redesigns and older sites that have had a lot of redirects over time, it's incredibly helpful. So that actually ended up making sense to me. We have Editor's Kit, Anti-Spam Bee. It was interesting from Nawai. Of course, form plugins like Gravity Forms, Contact 7, Updraft Plus, ACF, EDD, RCP. I forgot what RCP stands for.
That's Restrict Content Pro from Sandhills.
Yeah, that's right. I guessed it there in the thread, and he's like, "You're right." Yeah. What does Sally have there? We got Updraft, Gravity Forms, ACF, WP Rocket. We have a lot of customers at WP Engine who've been using NitroPack very successfully as well. And so we've kind of been doing some internal head-to-head tests there to get a bead on that. But I do like Rocket's product. Some of these I'm not familiar with. Short Pixel, WP Sweep, another one for Editor's Kit.
Seems like there's sort of like a commonality though. Like there's always a form plugin. There's some sort of optimization or caching sort of a thing, or like a block sort of a thing. I think developers use plugins like they've got their go-to. I got to do this, this, and this for my client sites. Whereas end users, like that's Pandora's box. I got 30 plugins for all these different things. 20% of which I use. 80% have just been installed but never deactivated, kind of a thing. So. Interesting to see what the developers are building with.
Well, Travis Smith, one of the shapers, he's definitely a nerdy guy, definitely a developer, but he's got kind of two lists. He's got his plugins list in his dev plugins list. And it seems like he organized his similar to how you're saying, which is like you have like functionality plugins, my grab bag of stuff I'm going to use to do add certain functionality to the site. But then he has what he calls development plugins. So like Query Monitor, Debug Bar, WP Migrate DB Pro, and WP Staging. So is that how you think about them as well? Like these utility plugins for the builder versus like a functional plugin that adds a form or something to your site?
Yeah, but even his list of functional plugins, with maybe the exception of Gravity Forms and Yoast, he still has some development type plugins in his and that just shows kind of the kind of guy Travis is, right? So like his non-development plugins are still development sort of centric, which is an interesting thing. So there's almost like three tiers, right? There's like total end user, like this is my recipe plugin. Then there's the sort of the in-between set, which are functional, but also sort of developmental. And then there's the hardcore development plugins, which he obviously uses several of.
So kind of like ACF, like I could make a recipe thingy with ACF, or I could use a recipe plugin. And so both are functional, but the ACF one is more development focused.
Yes.
Yeah, totally understand. That makes sense. Cool. Well, it looks like we have a lot of the same kind of repeating patterns. I guess Bill Erickson is building a lot of PWA sites. He had that in there. Looks like some other better search and replace. I've used that one before. I like that one. All right, next up, the next question was, when your clients or theme customers, shapers are like agencies and theme providers largely, choose WooCommerce over SaaS e-commerce platforms like Shopify, why do they do that? Like, why choose WooCommerce over something as simple as a Shopify? Is it the ability to customize, familiarity with WordPress? It's easier to manage the content and commerce together in one place. Like, why? Now, Brian, you have like this GIF here with someone like eating popcorn, ready to see them, the Michael Jackson GIF, where he's in the movie theater eating popcorn. Like, what do you think of this? I mean, I know you were like, we're going to talk about what others said, but just generally, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I kind of threw that in there just because WooCommerce is such a behemoth of functionality, a behemoth of conversation. I remember, in the Studio Press days trying to accommodate for WooCommerce and all the themes. So I understand all of what it sort of entails. And we probably only scratched the surface just from like theme support perspective. Like WooCommerce is a Shopify competitor. So if you think about it that way, like WooCommerce is a sort of platform in and of itself, but you're putting that on top of another platform, which means there's a lot of stuff going on. Thankfully, Automatic owns WooCommerce. So sort of the togetherness is a lot better than it would have been sort of if it was, two separate entities behind it. Like I have bittersweetness around Shopify versus WooCommerce just because Shopify is so easy to use. It's more like, it's kind of like the Squarespace ask this, like just easier to do from a user perspective. But I also understand we're talking to people who shape, Genesis and WordPress and the community stuff. And so the builders that we're talking about, I can understand why, yes, to your point, easy to manage everything in one place. I can customize some basic, storefront stuff in the theme that I've already created. So like the idea of a developer kind of having to go into Shopify and learn maybe a new theming or styling system, unless it was like a fully on, baked store, in which case I would just say use a subdomain, have a store, have the designs be similar. They don't have to be like pixel for pixel. But I was ready to see sort of what people would say, hence the GIF.
All right. Well, I guess to kind of summarize some of these thoughts here, like I think my comment was like, I remember in my agency days, like if I had a really simple store, like almost, just visual customizations, I might use a SaaS thing, especially if the customer had a low budget, because I could, get a store spun up very, very quickly, and send the customer on their way. But, when the customer needed, specific types of content or specific types of integration or changes to the funnel behavior within the checkout process, things like that was always WordPress and Woo or whatever. But that was like my pattern. It seems like, though, to kind of look at these answers, Ryan Murray of 3200 Creative is a very technical person. He's building some headless Shopify sites. Sally Getch, she says that her clients actually rarely choose the platform. They just want a store that does X. And so her familiarities with Woo, so she often builds there.
Check out what Anita said though. This is the one that caught me
Oh,
the
yes,
most.
yes, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I recently moved, and this is actually the opposite of how I would have expected it to go, right? I moved from Woo to Shopify, which makes sense. And you're like, oh, this is so much easier. It's cleaner. La, da, da, da. There would be no need to. But then she follows up by saying, then they moved them back to Woo. And I was like, whoa. Normally you're like, I went from Shopify to Woo, didn't like it. It was too hard or clunky. Then we went back, but it was the other way around. I was caught by that one.
Well, and I think it gets down to the customization point, and I think also the content and commerce side. So like if you have a Shopify store, like obviously they're good at e-commerce, but they're bad at CMS. And WordPress is wonderful at CMS. And so when you combine the two, you can really start to build very interesting experiences. Now, of course, Shopify has their headless offering. There's other ways to customize Shopify and build apps, but it's really out of the reach of most WordPress developers and the excuse me, the lion's share developers in the world, frankly, based on their skill sets today. They have to learn new skill sets to do those things. And for Anita, that means that she can't drop widgets, she can't drop blocks, she can't add functionality and uniqueness to the experience like she can in Woo. So when she's trying to help her clients stand out, she doesn't have her full toolkit. And this is true for a ton of people. Maybe not Ryan with 3200 Creative, like Ryan's a super hardcore engineer type person. But for the lion's share developers out there and website assemblers, people using plugins and themes, these things are just frankly out of reach in a platform like Shopify. And I think it really gets back to that customization part, which I think is such a critical value in WordPress. I think the other thing that surprised me on people's responses were how often they were building e-commerce stores where they didn't use Woo. They just had web pages that described the products or services, and then they would use an external payment system or process or provider to facilitate that transaction, but not actually have the product catalog and things behind the scenes in WordPress. Obviously, a lean and mean way to build an e-com store, and I know I built a ton of those in my agency days. Were you surprised to see that as well, Brian?
Not really. I mean, it kind of depends. I mean, e-commerce, are we talking about digital products? That's sort of a different beast than like physical products. It depends on the volume. Like if you're, if you sell like 3 shirts a week using something like Gravity Forms and like, a connection to Stripe or something like that, that makes sense. If you're Jeff Sheldon at UGMonk, who's selling like 5,000 t-shirts a day, then you need something that can hold up with that volume. But the one thing we haven't talked about here that kind of just thought about because I saw something in Twitter just not too long ago this morning relative to subdomains and subfolders and things like that. There's like an actual SEO thing here at play too, because if you're using WordPress for CMS and you're using Shopify, undoubtedly you're either on a subdomain or a different domain, right? In which case, that's a completely brand new site. That's a different site from the main site.
I thought Google had walked back on that. I thought they now treat subdomains as one domain.
Maybe you're right. Yeah. Last I knew they didn't, because I sort of did a little research on my own.
Oh yeah, I use that technique often to get extra rankings. But my understanding was, I'm not super deep on SEO anymore, but I do recall a few years back that being changed. But I do think it is relevant. Like you're managing 2 different sites. Yeah. There's likely some SEO implication you at least have to keep track of if it isn't like some super material thing. But like in having the content and the experiences in 2 different places, that's just doubling your management. And so like we do see people often, and rightfully so, that have SaaS-based e-com platforms that they use for their store. And then they use something like WordPress for the CMS part and the marketing part and the landing page part. And, the parts where you have to be creative. And then the parts where you don't necessarily have to be creative, but would be good, I guess, if you're optimizing your funnel, but maybe you just want to, put pictures and prices in a catalog and have them show on a web page. Then a SaaS thing that you don't highly customize might be a great thing. So, but I still think you still have to augment it. And so it's, kind of doubling up your maintenance requirements. It's making it harder to integrate those things together. And, almost certainly definitely SEO considerations, if not flat out things that might be challenging or even bad for you.
Yep.
All right. Next question. What do you wish the Genesis product universe would do to address building with WooCommerce stores? So, we got some more plugin suggestions from Sally here. Sometimes people will reply, out of sequence on some of the questions. But Anita is asking for more WooCommerce blocks or blocks that integrate with WooCommerce. And we got some, raised hands and heart eye emoji to that one. What do you think of that? I think that's actually super cool. I built a ton of landing pages. I would love to build with more like Woo integrated blocks. If I was
I guess the real question is, are we saying, will Genesis build and provide blocks specifically for Woo, or is that just somebody saying, I just wish WooCommerce itself would provide its own suite of blocks?
Well, people said both, right? So like, could Genesis blocks have blocks that are integrated with Woo? And then of course there were comments around Woo blocks itself, Woo blocks themselves from WooCommerce and Automatic. But I think like both. I mean, we did ask the question relative to Genesis, so probably more so the Genesis blocks context.
Yeah, I think even collections and things like that, right? There are some out there already that sort of demonstrate the store, and that sort of emulates like the Squarespace or the Shopify. I just want to click it and then have it show up and then like just change it to be my things. So from that perspective, I think, again, with WordPress, sometimes things take a while to get into core. And so like, it's just better to build your own version, if anything, temporarily, right? To do something that really enhances the other side of the software, right? Like, I think there's total opportunity to say, hey, if anything, we'll build some great collections or some layouts that demonstrate really interesting, well-designed ways to create a product page, right? Which is one of the reasons why with Gutenberg or the block editor, I get so excited now about building e-commerce sites, is because you no longer have to hack template files to like arrange the way like a single product page might look. You could build it the way you want. And with blocks, it's going to be so easy. So I get a little more excited and energized, more so in the past, about WooCommerce and stuff like that now with sort of the block system.
Yeah, it's just such, it's like if you have like just a product page and like that's your marketing strategy, like you're gonna lose, right? Amazon, the bigger e-commerce marketplaces and retailers are just chewing that up. So you have to stand out. And my opinion is the way you stand out is by presenting your products and the things you sell in unique ways, in interesting ways, from a content, layout, interactivity perspective. And if I'm in a dumb system, collecting things and not being able to iterate on that voice in the web pages that I build, well, then I'm going to lose. And I feel like, blocks are a great way to empower people, especially those content creators and marketers, to create that content that's going to be linked from social media or your email blast or whatever. And it's not, it might be a beautiful product page, but it's, if it doesn't have that interactivity and allows you to tell that story to support those marketing plays, well, then a generic-ish product page is just not going to do the trick. So that's why I think the blocks are super important. Now, I do like Nawai's recommendation there around like leveraging styles for existing Woo blocks and things like themes and other contexts within the Genesis universe, which is kind of a nice way to leverage what's already there instead of course, building new blocks. I thought that was a really good suggestion there from Nawai. We'll do more questions around this in the future. And if anyone listening has any ideas, please join us in Genesis Slack to share those. All right, let's move on to our next question. All right, so it looks like the next question, Brian, did you like shift your microphone and like your lighting and like, I'm wearing a different shirt.
Yeah, I don't know what happened. Maybe time warp, something?
Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. No, of course, Brian, the answer is that we've broken the Genesis Livecast episode for the Shapers recap into two recording segments, but for a very good reason. Brian, can you explain to everyone why we did this?
Yes, we were recording the first half of this, and I looked up at the clock and I realized it had struck 10 o'clock Central Time here in Chicago on Monday, and I had news to break. So
it wasn't news. We talked about it earlier as if it had already happened. Like this Genesis Community Live cast, like it's out the door at this point. I feel
showing our cards. We're showing our cards.
Yes, again.
Yes, I have come on board full time at WP Engine. Finally, I kind of always say in fun parentheses, finally. And so, developer relations advocate, where I will go into the community and talk to people who are using our products, those who aren't, and just generally help people adjust to WordPress's new way of doing things via the Gutenberg block editor.
I like it. I like it. Matter of fact, this very live cast is right in line with that mission. So I like that a lot.
Yep.
So glad to have you here. I thought it was really fun as I welcomed you there in some of the internal Slack channels, just looking at the caliber of WordPress folks, Jason Ball and Jason Cohen and Chris Wiegman, all saying hi to you. That was really special to see that all in one place. So super cool. Okay, so now that we've completely broken through the fourth wall here by acknowledging the break and recording, we're going to go ahead and continue with the Shapers episode here. So the next question up here is Rob. I ask Rob Stinson, who is in the Shapers group. He's part of the WP Engine product marketing team. But he says, Rob Stinson and others have commented that, quote, the easy things in WordPress are getting easier and the hard things are getting harder. This was Rob's observation that building a site without code because of Gutenberg is getting incredibly easy, but creating custom software like plugins with WordPress is getting harder. Brian, you were the first to comment. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, like I generally can speak to this because I do create for those who are using it on sort of I'll call it the entry level, but just the user level. So while I am not a heavy programmer, I don't build plugins, I don't build things that interact with WordPress core. I can't speak to the level of difficulty in which that is going. From what I've heard, grapevine and sort of otherwise, it seems to be that way. I hear people talking about, well, it's PHP based, now it's React based, and now it's this based and that based. And so I kind of understand it from afar. I will say this.
From the theme developer, and I mean, themes are software in a very real way.
Yes.
But I think you have a very, very relevant point of view there.
Yes, that is true. It has become easier for me as I'm working on developing and building products and things like that, right, for WordPress. The theme.json stuff, the things that are becoming newer to us, as builders through WordPress core has enabled us to stop having to kind of do it our own way. Patterns and things of that nature are examples of, we don't have to build plugins that house containers the way that we did 3 years ago. And that just WordPress is sort of iterating and, it's going quite quickly, to be perfectly honest. It's hard to follow along and the documentation's poor because things are, out of date 2 weeks later or, one version later. So generally speaking, though, like as a builder for WordPress on sort of the elementary level, yes, it has become easier to serve up the ability for people to use the product and use it the way I think WordPress has intended it to.
Yeah, and I think that provides a lot of power to custom developers because every custom developer has some non-technical user who's creating content with that site. So I like to see that synergy there. I think you brought up, here and of course in the meeting, theme.json, which I had not considered when I drafted that question for the meeting, as a really nice example of how, creating themes is getting much easier from scratch. And that's a really good call out. I know you also touched on, from the plugin developer's perspective, the technologies that you have to understand and implement and do well at has drastically grown. And so, I think that's a valid point there by Rob Stinson. Chris Wiegman actually has a good post on this as well.
Yeah.
That I thought goes really into it. So if you're watching or listening or reading, go check out Chris Wiegman's post. It does a really good breakdown of it. I'd say the rest of the Shapers responses were kind of pretty much in that same kind of vein. So, good sentiment to keep in mind. But I think I agree with your theme.json call out. That's really making theme creation much more accessible to many more people. And the people I know who are sophisticated theme developers like it too, because they're like, I can do that quicker. Look at that, right?
Yep.
So what do you think of that part?
Yeah, I think, and I mentioned this in my post on the thread there. The only thing I don't love and have never loved about WordPress is that it always feels somewhat half baked, right? They're always iterating and putting in new features, but one or two of which make it into core, the rest of which are still experimental. And while I love that because it gives us the ability to kind of forward think or forward prepare, there's days where I'm like, okay, 5.8 shipped, but there's only like 10% of theme.json that's there, which is good to cut your teeth, good to understand it. But like now I can kind of taste the potential of where it's going. There's like that 90%, 50 of it might be in Gutenberg, the plugin right now, the 40% still not done. And so like, it just kind of always perpetually feels like we're working with software that's never finished.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, particularly with new features. And I remember asking this question in a prior Shapers meeting, like, when are you going to adopt Gutenberg or something? And they're like, oh, I don't know, like 6 months, a year after it's released. Because, and that's, pretty true, I think, for a lot of software like this, in those first iterations. And I think people are kind of trained to wait for the documentation and the feature parity and bugs to work out.
Yep.
We see that quite a bit, of course. Okay, on to our next question. Have you created a custom block yet, either from scratch with Genesis blocks or another way? And if not, why not? Let's see. I'm going to start with Sally here. I see Ryan's comment. I'm going to get back to that. But she says that she's been building with ACF blocks. And she said she's built several and that she's been meaning to try Genesis custom blocks, but hasn't gotten around to it. I think that's another thing, Brian, is like, it's not just like the features that you might kind of settle on and wait to see how they shake out and how they might work and for bugs to be worked out. It seems like your tools are also that. So
Yeah.
like Sally's a shaper and like she has access to custom blocks and custom blocks pro and like just hasn't had the time to get around to it. She's a hardworking person out there. I think she's in Cali and she definitely is. She's got bills to pay and clients to keep happy. I mean, certainly you can empathize with this,
Yeah.
Brian. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's tough for people. And, even prior acquisition, one of the struggles was as Genesis evolved and implemented new ways, better ways of implementing things and features or whatever, there's always sort of that secondary people who build on top of what you're building, right? Even so, we're building Genesis on top of WordPress. WordPress moves fast. Genesis has to move fast, but there's still another sort of train on that car, or, car on that train, I guess, where then they have to say, okay, now WP Engine or StudioPress or Genesis has implemented a new way of handling, implementing demo content. We have to then learn that, but we're also trying to pay the bills. So it's like kind of a balance between how do I invest in sort of progressing into the future versus I got to just stay afloat and pay the bills and just work with what I know and what has worked traditionally.
Awesome. Speaking of awesome, Nawai Vidola, Badiola, sorry, Nawai, out of Spain, a wonderful community leader, has a fairly large community there of Genesis site creators there in Spain that Nawai works with, but he also owns Awesome Press, which is a Genesis theme company, and he's made some really nice new themes that you can find on the StudioPress marketplace. But his themes have one-click theme setup and all these beautiful demo blocks that load with the themes. And I was imagining that he'd made all the blocks, and he replies here and is like, well, we made some blocks, but we only made one block for that theme. And I was like, wow, wait, what am I missing here? And we go under the thread, and basically he was leveraging existing blocks within Genesis blocks as well as core blocks, and then adding styles in his theme. So it felt very much like a custom block experience for that theme. And of course it was because the look and feel is integrated all the way through all the different kinds of blocks. It's incredibly well done with, a relatively low engineering investment there from Nawai. Did you see that? Do you agree with that assessment?
I did, and I resonated heavily with it because I like to build and Nathan Rice and I have always sort of defaulted to just kind of the WordPress way of doing things. We never wanted to reinvent the wheel. We never felt the need to sort of brand ourselves within the dashboard, and so it was always easy for us to be more creative on the front end of it all than try to like over orchestrate or over develop on the back end. And so from a a maintenance standpoint, which is the point I think he was sort of alluding to, is I just have to make it look pretty and don't have to worry about things breaking because it's WordPress core, and that kind of in and of itself usually kind of lends itself to being stable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, great to see that from Nawai, and great to get the feedback in general from the shapers. Our last point of the day in the meeting was a little bit more of a serious matter. One of our fellow shapers, a gentleman named Nick Croft, you've likely heard me mention him in prior shaper updates, has a family member that's going through a health crisis. Many people in the Genesis and WordPress communities saw this unfold, and social media is still unfolding. My heart, certainly WP Engine's heart, goes out to Nick and his family. And so we asked them to send, private notes of sympathy and prayers. Some of the other shapers shared, and I had the opportunity to chat with Nick very briefly, not distracting him certainly in any way. But some of the community members had kind of banded together and created a site for those that wanted to contribute to support Nick and his family during this time. Certainly a lot of medical bills and other expenses associated with this. I think it would really been very heartwarming to see the Genesis and WordPress community kind of come together to support Nick, and very proud to be part of a community that does things like that. If you're listening, if you're watching, reading, and you want to also contribute, you can go to geekhearts.online. Again, site set up by community members. It links to a GoFundMe page. You can make an anonymous contribution if you'd like. Or if you just want to keep Nick in your thoughts, sorry about that. If you want to just keep Nick in your thoughts and prayers, I think that's great too. So, Brian, I know you've known Nick for a good number of years. I mean, he wrote the book Genesis Explained. Yep. He's been a shaper since the very beginning. Just a really leader in the community. But I don't know if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I'll just add that Nick's always had the heart of a giver. He's always wanted to help. From support, kind of how he came in through our community, to writing the book, and to even what he's doing now. He's always just been one to lend a hand. So it's kind of one of those times where it's like he would never ask for it back, but I certainly think, and I tear up even thinking about it, just it's time for the community to give back to Nick because of what they're going through. So
yeah, absolutely. Definitely been following him very closely on social media there, and again, my heart certainly the WP Engine's heart goes out to Nick and his family, and just wish his family members speedy recovery and what they're going through. So, yep. Ending on a bit of a somber note there, but really wanted to make sure to take that time to honor Nick, and mention again geekhearts.online if you'd like to contribute. So, Brian, thank you so much for joining us today.
Teleporting back.
I feel weird saying us now because you work here and you
are. It took us 3 years to get to this point, but here we are.
All right. Well, I guess us is we now. So
true.
Cool.
True story.
Well, thanks everyone else for listening and watching and reading. This has been the Shapers Recap for September 2021. Again, this has been your host, David Vogelpohl. I've been a proud member of the Genesis community for over 8 years. And I love helping the Genesis community get better together with my friends from the Shapers.